Great. So hello and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Environmental Protection, the Board of Public Utilities, and the Economic Development Authority, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule tonight to attend the RGGI Strategic Funding Plan Public Information Session. My name is Helene Barr, and I have the pleasure of being your host for the next hour and a half. To give you just a bit of background on myself, I'm the Bureau Chief of the Climate Change and Clean Energy Program here at the Department of Environmental Protection, and my program is dedicated to helping the state meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals. Our major responsibilities include developing the state's greenhouse gas inventory, tracking progress towards our climate mitigation goals, and helping to coordinate the state's investment of RGGI auction proceeds. Tonight, you will learn about New Jersey's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, affectionately known as RGGI, so you're going to hear that term probably over and over again, the state's investment in climate, clean energy, and equity projects, the development of the state's next strategic funding plan, and how you can get involved. Next slide, please. So climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are truly at a defining moment. The actions we take today will dictate the future and the viability of generations to come. To that end, we are seeking your input on what is a priority for your community. At the end of this webinar, we'll be walking through the ways that you as a New Jersey resident or business owner or student can engage in helping New Jersey reduce and respond to climate change. We are opening today as our 30-day open public comment period, and that will close on July 11th. And in particular, we're unveiling a new online tool we've developed in partnership with the New Jersey Office of Innovation. This tool will allow you to vote on climate change solution ideas. And these final results will help inform the writing of our next RGGI strategic funding plan. So we have a little QR code there. You can use your phone to take a peek at this tool. I've been told that you should turn your phone horizontal for the best results. Next slide, please. So before we jump into the webinar and the agenda, I'd just like to go over a bit of housekeeping. One, this meeting is being recorded, and by being here, you agree to be recorded. The recording will be made available on our website. We'll be able to share a link to the webinar with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your community members and colleagues. All attendees are muted. If you have a question, please enter it into the chat box. If you think of a question for our speakers at any time, just type it right in there. We're going to be keeping track of that, and we'll be taking questions at the end. Next slide, please. So during this webinar, you will learn about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, New Jersey's process for developing a strategic funding plan to invest our proceeds from our participation in RGGI. To date, New Jersey has received over $290 million from its participation. And you can see from our panel, it has taken truly a small village to even begin investing that funding. And this is the first time that all three agencies are collaboratively presenting on what has been done to date. And we're going to close out this presentation by discussing how you can be engaged in the development of our next strategic funding plan, which will oversee the investments of funds starting in 2023. So before I hand it off to our esteemed panel, next slide, please. I thought it would be helpful to just do some quick level setting about New Jersey's greenhouse gas inventory and the state's broader climate mitigation goals. According to the department's most recent inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions, you can see that the transportation sector is the largest source. These emissions primarily come from the cars and SUVs that we drive every single day. The second largest source in New Jersey comes from the building sector. These emissions come from our burning of natural gas and oil to heat our homes and run our appliances. And the third largest sector is from electric generation. Here, the state relies largely on natural gas to power our electrical grid and to in turn power our homes, electronics, and appliances. The state has some really ambitious goals to curb these emissions. We're working towards reducing our emissions by 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. As you can see here, we still have a long way to go to achieving these goals, and time is moving quickly. Thus, the investment of our RGGI proceeds really is a vital tool to help us achieve our climate goals. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bob Kettig, the Assistant Director of Climate Change, Clean Energy, and Sustainability at the Department of Environmental Protection. And he's going to talk a bit about RGGI and the strategic funding plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Helene. I'm Bob Kettig, Assistant Director for Climate Change, Clean Energy, and Sustainability here at DEP. And I want to thank you all for joining this evening. Your input is important to us as we develop this next New Jersey RGGI strategic funding plan. Next slide, please. So, all right, so what is RGGI? The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, is a market-based program that's designed to cap and reduce carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel electric generating units that are above 25 megawatts of capacity. RGGI consists of 12 states. That's obviously including New Jersey, and it's including Pennsylvania, which is going to begin participation on July 1st. So through statutes and regulations based on the RGGI model rule, each participating state establishes the specifics of their individual state programs based upon their own state statutory or regulatory authority. An interesting fact now about RGGI, with the inclusion of Pennsylvania, the RGGI states combined have an economy that if it were its own country, it would be the third largest economy in the world, only behind the US and China. So there's a lot of economic influence and a demonstration that a cap and trade program in an economy of that size has worked to drive down emissions. Next slide, please. So how does RGGI work? RGGI works by, there's a regional cap is established for the total CO2 emissions in the region that could be emitted from the regulated power plants. And then the individual states offer allowances. So allowances are 1 ton of CO2, I'm sorry, 1 million tons of CO2 emissions that would equal the amount of emissions that each facility emits during a given control period. So electric generating units are required to purchase the allowances equal to their emissions for a 3-year control period. And then states receive that revenue and they invest that in projects and programs that reduce emissions further. And we'll talk about some of those projects and programs throughout this presentation. Next slide. So the key tenets of RGGI are that a declining cap and the price of allowances in the quarterly auction sends price signals to electric generating units. Units that emit less have a lower cost of operating, and zero emitting sources do not incur any cost for the compliance obligations. So by sending those price signals and favoring lower emitting electric generating, that sends a price signal and that drives down emissions. The other key tenet is that the states invest auction proceeds to further drive down emissions and to also reduce demand for electricity. Now, historically, RGGI has invested much of the money, the revenue from the auctions, in energy efficiency programs, but recently RGGI states, and certainly including New Jersey, have had an additional focus on electrification of transportation. Next slide, please. So New Jersey was one of the original participating states in RGGI going back to 2005. The states in the region that had similar climate aspirations, policy goals, came together to sign an MOU. And New Jersey was involved in that and creating the initial model rule, the MOU, and really the key tenets of RGGI that are still in operation today. Moving forward, the Global Warming Response Act statute was signed into law in 2007. It laid out the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% from 2006 baseline levels by 2050. Also, the Global Warming Solutions Fund Act, which was statutory authority for New Jersey to create a market-based program to drive down emissions in electric generating sector. And that's where RGGI filled that need. And by joining RGGI, that was consistent with the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Fund Act. Moving forward, New Jersey also promulgated regulations, both to outline the procedures, administrative process, and the mechanisms for how the RGGI auction is facilitated, and also regulations for how the revenue from the auctions are going to be allocated. In 2012, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie withdrew New Jersey from RGGI. So we were no longer a participating state for a period of time. And then in 2018, through executive order, Governor Murphy ordered that New Jersey re-enter RGGI. So we went back through the process. We adopted regulations in 2019 to re-enter. And in 2020, New Jersey began participation in the RGGI program again. And also we published our first RGGI strategic funding plan. And that's where we are now. It's hard to believe, but we're into developing the second 3-year funding program. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an outline of high level of how the Global Warming Solutions Fund Act works. Passed in 2008, it enabled the New Jersey's participation in the CO2 emission trading program, RGGI, and it established specific state agency funding lanes for the investment of the RGGI proceeds, setting clear boundaries that require agencies to spend the RGGI funds within specified program areas. It also established the objectives for the investment of the funds. So our individual programs will go through some of the more specifics of this later, but just in general terms, the revenue from the auctions are spread across the Economic Development Authority, the Board of Public Utilities, and the DEP. Next slide, please. So what is the strategic funding plan? The strategic funding plan sets the state's priorities for the investment of RGGI auction proceeds. It's jointly developed every 3 years to establish a common agenda to systematically coordinate and align resources and actions. The funding plan ensures that money is dedicated to projects and programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions cost effectively, which is a requirement of the statute, the Global Warming Solutions Fund Act, and also consistent with Governor Murphy's executive order, focuses those investments in overburdened communities. The funding plan ensures that at the state, we have a shared vision for change, a common understanding of the problem reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and a joint approach to solving it across all 3 agencies. Next slide, please. So the strategic funding plan objective, this is what we often refer to as the 5+1. So the Global Warming Solutions Fund Act includes 5 objectives that are mandated by the statute. And also Governor Murphy's executive order that requires funding be directly responsive to the negative effects on human health and the environment in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the effects of environmental degradation and climate change. Next slide, please. So New Jersey's first strategic funding plan was released in April of 2020, and it identified 4 major initiatives with a strong focus on clean and equitable transportation. So they were to 1, catalyze clean, equitable transportation, 2, promote blue carbon in coastal habitats, and 3, enhance the forests and urban forests. And it also had EDA create a New Jersey Green Bank. Next slide, please. Okay, so the RGGI investments from the 2020 to 22 strategic funding plan, 23% of the funding has been awarded. That is reflected on the climate investment dashboard. So any of you can go on that and get a snapshot of where the funding is being allocated. And beyond that, we anticipate committing another $40 million, $10.2 million for the Green Bank, $8 million for the New Jersey ZIP expansion to shore towns, and $15 million for Climate Solutions Grant Program, and also $2.5 million for tree planting. This totals 36% of the funding to date. Next slide, please. So what's next? So the 2023 to 2025 strategic funding plan, which we are seeking input on that today, June 9th. This is our first public informational webinar. In June and July, we're going to be having the 30-day comment period to the informative development of the strategic funding plan. So we'll be going through some exercises as part of this presentation to get input, but we're welcoming further input in writing during this period. In the fall, we're going to release the draft strategic funding plan, and we will also have a series of public stakeholder meetings to go over that. And then we anticipate in the winter of 2023, we're going to release the final strategic funding plan. So at the end of this presentation, Matt Rivas from our Office of Climate Change and Clean Energy will provide an overview of the 30-day public engagement process, and he has some ways that you can get involved and we can get your input. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleagues in order. Lauren Griffin from the BPU, Melissa Aviango from DEP, and Victoria Carey from the Economic Development Authority. They are going to discuss the funding lanes that each one of their particular programs will be dealing with.
All right, thank you very much, Bob. I think I am first, so if we want to go to the next slide. My name is Lauren Griffith, and I'm here today from the Board of Public Utilities. Thank you everyone for joining. If we can go to the next slide, just wanted to give a quick background on the board. So the Board of Public Utilities is the state agency with the authority to oversee the regulated utilities throughout the state, which includes the natural gas and electricity utilities, which is probably most applicable here for this conversation, but this also includes water, telecommunications, and cable television. And the BPU's mission is to ensure safe, adequate, and proper utility services at a reasonable rate for customers throughout New Jersey. So we can go to the next slide. Within the BPU is the Division of Clean Energy, and the DCE manages and coordinates programs aimed at achieving 100% clean energy by 2050, as laid out in the Energy Master Plan. Within the Division of Clean Energy is the New Jersey Clean Energy Program, which oversees several initiatives and offices listed here below, such as the Office of Clean Energy Equity, Energy Efficiency, Electric Vehicles, Offshore Wind, Solar Programs, and Energy Storage. Next slide. So within the BPU, equity is a key focus in all that we do, and we're committed to ensuring that all New Jersey residents have access to clean energy and related workforce development and job opportunities. Those two together are key in achieving the clean energy transition. We believe that a more fair and equitable clean energy future that affords its benefits to all communities is possible, and we're working towards that goal. Below, you'll just see two of the key documents that guide a lot of our work. First, the Clean Energy Act, and second, the Energy Master Plan. The Clean Energy Act calls for programs that ensure universal access to energy efficiency measures and serves the needs of low-income communities throughout the state. It seeks to reduce the inequity experienced by groups and individuals across New Jersey who disproportionately lack access to energy-efficient housing, appliances, and technologies. The Energy Master Plan, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, establishes that the state's priorities in developing its statewide energy efficiency structure are affordability, equity, environmental justice, economic development, decarbonization, and public health. The EMP has 7 strategies to get New Jersey to that 100% clean energy by 2050. I wanted to give you one more look here at the strategic funding lanes laid out for the 3 agencies that you'll hear from today. The BPU specifically receives 20% of the RGGI funding dollars, and we have our key focus on low income and moderate income residential sector communities. You'll see they're listed below a few of the focus areas that our programs can work to achieve. They include reducing electricity demand, reducing impact to ratepayers. You'll see there at the 3rd bullet, the focus on electric vehicle goals. So there's quite a few initiatives that all of our strategic funding plans, current and going forward, will be able to work towards. Next slide. So in the current strategic funding plan, BPU was charged with focusing on catalyzing clean and equitable transportation. And that is where we used our RGGI dollars to develop new or enhance existing programming, enabling low and moderate income households, particularly those in environmental justice communities, to participate in and benefit from state efforts to improve access to clean transportation options. This focus was also intended to complement state efforts that incorporate electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout the state. Additionally, BPU, in tandem with programming from EDA and DEP, was directed to drive concerted efforts to reduce air pollutants in overburdened communities. For the first half of our current strategic funding plan, that which is running from 2020 to 2022, the BPU entered into a memorandum of understanding with the DEP, in which the DEP utilized BPU funds to implement programs aligned with the BPU's programmatic focus for RGGI initiatives, as described in the previous slide. The BPU is also looking forward to launching a new program utilizing remaining funds from the current strategic funding plan. Details on this program will be coming soon. So I now turn it over to my colleague from the DEP to talk about the programs implemented through our MOU. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. This is Melissa Evanego from New Jersey DEP, the Bureau of Mobile Sources. I'm going to keep my camera off. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues, so I want to make sure that my audio is clear. So for the first strategic spending plan, DEP and BPU projects focused on Initiative 1, catalyzing clean, equitable transportation. The RGGI funds allowed us to accelerate the electric transportation sector in the medium and heavy duty weight classes. Projects were awarded to local government and overburdened residential areas. Next slide. To meet our climate goals, we need to continue to have aggressive electrification on both the light duty and medium heavy duty vehicles. So to help frame the discussion, I want you to focus on these graphs. So while the units aren't as important as the slope of the trajectory, you'll see we have a long way to go. For light duty vehicles, we have approximately 6 million registered vehicles in the state, but only 60,000 are electric. For the medium duty weight class, we have about 500,000 registered vehicles and 20 electric. So we have a long way to go. Until we achieve cost parity between the traditional ICE vehicles and EVs, will continue to need financial incentives along with relevant policies and strategies to achieve, to drive the market to move in this direction. To date, with VW and RGGI funds for both DEP and BPU, we have funded 161 electric trucks, buses, and EDA will fund approximately 300 with their 45 million currently allocated for that program. In addition, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the federal funds that will go to school buses, is competitive, but if we assume that we get the maximum each year, we could fund 1,500 school buses by the end of the 5 years. So when you do all the math, we could fund 2,000 medium and heavy duty vehicles out of that universe of 500,000. That's only 0.4%. So you can see we have a long way to go. Next slide, please. So New Jersey has been working really hard. There are numerous incentive programs strategically targeting different segments of the statewide fleet. You can see here all three agencies, the DEP, EDA, and BPU, were working really hard on incentivizing light duty and medium and heavy duty vehicles, providing incentives for charging infrastructure or the infrastructure, as well as everything that goes behind the meter with some utility make-ready programs. We're looking at shared mobility, as well as providing consumer awareness and dealer training. More information can be found on the DEP website, our Drive Green page, and that address is listed right there. Next slide, please. So something that we don't always think of is the zoning and the permitting provisions for electric vehicle charging stations. The EV law that was signed in 2021 sets mandatory requirements for chargers and make-ready parking spaces for new construction at multi-unit dwellings, new garages, or parking lots. This was really an important step because this helps ease the process and it ensures that we're putting in charging stations at the beginning and making those lots and different areas EV ready. Next slide. So please visit, like I mentioned before, DEP's Drive Green webpage. It provides more details about our incentive programs and our outreach programs. We also have links to all our sister agency programs. There's a whole lot of information there. So please stop by that webpage. Next slide. Okay, so let's get into what specifically did we do with the RGGI funds. So DEP performed, well, it had 3 project solicitations. The first one was at the end of 2018. DEP did a solicitation for electrification projects in accordance with the VW Mitigation Trust consent decree. We had such an overwhelming response with over $500 million worth of projects submitted. We decided to use those projects that were submitted through that VW solicitation for projects using the RGGI spending. So those projects covered 100%. So the funding for that first solicitation for RGGI, we used 100% of funding for government vehicles and 80% for private projects. Our second and our third solicitation, we decided that we wanted to stretch the money a little bit further so we can get greater greenhouse gas reductions. So we modified our funding mechanism to cover only the cost of the incremental difference between a new diesel vehicle and a new electric vehicle, as well as the cost of the charging station. Okay, next slide. So DEP administered our own funding projects as well as the BPU. So this slide shows you a little bit about the breakdown of the RGGI spending using DEP funds. For the first 2 years of auction proceeds for DEP, we had about $20 million. We awarded projects for 52 vehicles, along with the charging stations for those vehicles, for local government projects in overburdened areas. We also funded 1 e-mobility project, and this was in Jersey City to expand upon the very popular car sharing program. Next slide. Like previously stated, DEP administered the first 1.5 years of BPU funding. Again, this was because we had such an overwhelming response to all of our project solicitations. The total administered was $26 million, and that was for a total of 60 vehicles, plus the charging stations in overburdened residential areas. You'll see here that there were also 4 e-mobility projects that received funding using the BPU funds. These projects included shuttles and car sharing, fast charging hubs in cities, and this was to provide clean transportation in areas where people may not own their own vehicles. Next slide. So looking to close the strategic plan, we still have a lot to do. We have an additional year of RGGI funding that we'll be looking to award in the same manner that we did the last solicitation, with providing the incremental cost between the diesel, a new diesel and a new electric vehicle and the charging station. We'll continue with focusing again on the electric of the medium and heavy duty vehicles. We have hit some bumps in the road, mainly supply chain issues, whether it was supply chain issues with the vehicles or with the infrastructure, but we're learning lessons and we're trying to work around some of those obstacles. The good news is there's still a lot of interest in what we're doing. With our 3 solicitations, we had about $690 million worth of projects submitted. And between the DEP, BPU, and EDA, about $107 million has been awarded. Next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot more work that has to take place to meet our climate goals. With 99.6% of the medium and heavy duty population still using fossil fuels, we have a long way to go. Local government through the state, local government throughout the whole state still needs incentives to electrify, whether they're overburdened or not. E-mobility projects are very important. it's important to bring clean transportation to areas where people use mass transit. And so e-mobility is changing all the time. We're looking at different ways to bring those projects to the areas that need it. So despite all the federal funding that's coming and that you might be hearing, it's still important for RGGI funds to supplement the transportation electrification. There's a lot of different areas in the transportation sector, and RGGI funds, as we've shown, have gone far to accelerating electrification in this area. That's all I have, so thank you. And next up is Victoria Carey from EDA.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So I'm Victoria Carey, the Clean Energy Manager with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, or the EDA. Our mission is to grow the state's economy and increase equitable access to economic opportunity. This dovetails really well with the work that we're doing with the RGGI funds, tying that economic opportunity and equitable access to a clean energy economy. Quick background on what we've been doing at the EDA since we rejoined as a state, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. In July of 2020, the EDA issued a request for input on zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. We received outreach from almost 30 folks who were providing insight based on their experiences in the industry. So this included vendors, transportation advocates, environmental justice advocates, et cetera, and community members. Based on that, we then worked with an external consultant who were experts in the space of zero emission vehicles, ecosystem studies, and economic impacts. And we worked with them via a competitive bid process where they were procured as our consultants. Working with them and in concert on a weekly basis with our partners at the Department of Environmental Protection and the Board of Public Utilities and the Department of Transportation to ensure that we had a holistic view of all of the state's infrastructure, tying in as appropriate NJ Transit and their public infrastructure work. We developed a plan to move forward on our initial pilot program, NJZIP. You can see the logo here. It stands for the New Jersey Zero Emission Incentive Program. This pilot program is a first come, first served voucher program. And a voucher is essentially, you can think of it as a coupon that reduces the out-of-pocket cost for buying a zero emission vehicle. The purchaser will agree to buy this vehicle. They get approved for the voucher amount. Once the vehicle is confirmed, delivered, and registered to that New Jersey business or institution, the vendor is then paid out that voucher amount. And these vouchers are sized to approximately cover the difference in cost between a gas and a diesel vehicle, a traditional ICE vehicle, to equivalent zero emission vehicle. In our program, based on our funding lane, as was shown by my colleagues at the BPU earlier, we are looking at commercial, industrial, and institutional entities. And therefore, we're focused on the medium and heavy duty vehicle space. And in our initial pilot, focused exclusively on medium duty vehicles. So you can think of something sized from, maybe a small delivery van up to something that you might rent to move from your apartment, or maybe a community shuttle bus. Anything in that range, and it can be any type of vehicle. So both trucks, vans, passenger transportation, or specialty vehicles such as refuse vehicles. Eligible participants, as I noted, were commercial, industrial, or institutional entities that are registered to do business in the state of New Jersey or represent a local municipal or county government. Initially, in our pilot communities, we wanted to center in on some of the overburdened communities that have disproportionately experienced the impacts of negative impacts tied to emissions, especially those tied to transportation emissions. And we initially launched with a $15 million pilot voucher fund in the greater Camden and the greater Newark areas. In September of 2021, we then expanded, adding additional funding due to the fact that we had reached the number of applicants associated with $15 million. So we added another $9.25 million to our voucher pool and added the greater New Brunswick area, selected based on the same quantitative methodology that greater Camden and Newark were selected on. In December of 2021, again, having run through funding, we added an additional $20 million to the voucher pool and added the Greater Shore area, which comprises essentially the entirety of the Jersey Shore, those overburdened communities within that range. As of May 2022, just a few weeks ago, we started receiving our first requests for vouchers to be redeemed, which means we're starting to see some of those investments that we made and set-asides that we have for the vouchers that were approved come to fruition. So thank you for going to the next slide here. So the goals of our pilot were threefold. Our goal was to accelerate zero emission vehicle adoption, giving especially direct support to small businesses, provide immediacy of emissions reductions to overburdened communities. So looking at the target sectors where we knew that the vehicles were available most rapidly, especially considering, as Melissa pointed out, the supply chain difficulties that have plagued a lot of the world's supply chain in general, but especially in the vehicle space. So looking at the medium duty vehicle population and assessing based on this pilot market interest, effective program structures and funding levels to determine if a longer term or broader program would be appropriate. And right now we are in the midst of assessing that a further expansion of the pilot to give access to more members of our communities, add more funding, and look at different vehicle classes that also cause a significant amount of emissions and pollution. And as you can see up on the slide, the pilot is starting to do what it is intended to do. We've seen significant and continuous demand for our program, hence the 3 expansions to date. We've received approximately $42.5 million in applications so far, with 29.2 of them approved already, the remainder not being declined or withdrawn, but simply being processed at this time. Just those approved applications are representative of 125 applicants or small businesses primarily that are associated with 271 vehicles, medium duty zero emission vehicles. Our purchaser demographics are up here of those who've been approved so far. We've seen a significant participation in the small business community with 95% of our applicants that have been approved to date being small businesses. And just over half of our applicants being minority-owned businesses, seeing with the subset being 14% are women-owned businesses, and another 4 applicants with 3% are veteran-owned businesses. This is tied to emissions impacts just of the first 24 that have been calculated so far of over the projected vehicle lifespan, 60,000 short tons of carbon dioxide emissions reductions. You know, this pilot, it's very exciting and we're enthusiastic about its impacts thus far, but as has been voiced by my colleagues at the DEP and the BPU already, it's only one part of sort of a multi-state, multi-pronged effort to support a transition to a cleaner transportation system and to make good on our promise and the promise that Governor Murphy made for a stronger, fairer, and greener New Jersey. And it's made possible by these RGGI funds. So with that, I'll hand it over to our next presenter.
Okay, thanks, Victoria. I'm Lauren Gazerowitz, and I'm with the New Jersey Forest Service under the DEP, and can go to the next slide so I can start. Okay, so for green carbon, we're going to focus on Initiative 3 of the Strategic Funding Plan, which is to enhance forests and urban forests. So this initiative acknowledges the critical role that forests play in the carbon cycle, and that in order to meet the state's 80 by 50 emissions reduction goal, that forest resources have to be promoted, protected, and maintained. So forests actively store carbon as well as continuously remove it from the atmosphere. And in addition to storing and sequestering carbon, urban and community forests also contribute to demand-side energy reductions by providing shade and insulation and reducing the need for air conditioning and heaters. Next slide. So I'll start with why carbon is important in the context of our state's emissions goals and forests. So the New Jersey's Global Warming Response Act, or the 85 by 50 report, set a goal for reducing emissions of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is carbon dioxide plus other greenhouse gases, to 80% below their 2006 levels by the year 2050. And we can see in this graphic on the right, the breakdown of greenhouse gas sources and sinks in the state. So like Helene mentioned earlier, the transportation sector up here in blue at the top is the biggest emitter. And we can see all the way down at the bottom in this darker green color that terrestrial sinks, which includes forests and blue carbon, sequester approximately 8% of the state's total greenhouse gas emissions. So this means that the state's natural features sequestered more carbon than was generated by the waste sector in that same year. And one of our goals is to increase that 8% sequestration rate by managing our forests with carbon in mind. Next slide. So now I'll talk a little bit about what forest carbon looks like in New Jersey. And just a quick aside that all of this data comes from the USDA Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, which is a nationally recognized and publicly available data source. So our forests have 5 different carbon pools, which include the above ground live pool, which has our plant and tree stems, our branches and our leaves, the below ground live pool, which has all of our tree and plant roots, the deadwood pool, the litter pool, and the soil pool. So our 2 largest carbon pools are the above ground live pool and the soil pool. And it's important to note that there's carbon flux or carbon movement between these pools. So when something in the above ground pool dies, some of that carbon is emitted back into the atmosphere, but most of it gets transferred into other pools like the deadwood pool or the litter pool. Now, if we wanted to look at total tons of carbon per acre across the state, it looks like this map on the right. So the darker the color, like the more black the color is here, the more carbon there is per acre. And if we wanted to highlight the areas of the state that hold the most carbon, we can see here that the highlands up top in red, the sourlands here in green in the center of the state, and the pinelands down in the south all have really large sums of carbon, as these are the regions of the state that have the most trees present. Next slide. Now, the question is, how do we use all of this information to manage our forests? And the answer is that the best way to promote forest health and resilience is by diversifying forest management practices. Our forests are really diverse across the state, and it's beneficial to assess and manage them individually based on their current state and what they might look like in the future. So managing for southern pine beetle outbreaks wouldn't be done in the same way that oak would be managed for regeneration, the same way that a doctor wouldn't treat a sore throat, the same way that they treat a broken leg. So guided by the strategies outlined in our State Forest Action Plan, we use forest data from our own contracted state forest inventories, as well as from that forest inventory and analysis program that I mentioned, as well as the iTree suite of programs. And when we're making management decisions in both traditional and urban forests, we use the forest vegetation similar, again, as well as many of the iTree programs, to simulate and project different management practices into the future to see how well they suit our management goals. And now I'm going to pass this on to Mike Martini, who's going to talk a little bit more about green carbon from the urban forest perspective.
Hi, everyone. As Lauren said, I'm Michael Martini and deal with the urban and community forestry side of forestry. As Lauren said, the values for New Jersey from these slides were calculated using the iTree Suite platform. This tool is a development by the U.S. Forest Service and can help neighborhoods and communities quantify the benefits of their local trees. And some of the results of this you'll be hearing from me is from an economic study done by the Northeast Midwest State Foresters Alliance through the federal U.S. Forest Service grant program. As you can see, the current canopy in New Jersey has 179 million individual trees, which translates to 60% of New Jersey residents living in an urban forest. These trees annually save us $57 million in emissions and sequester $63.9 million worth of carbon annually. Our urban forests provide us with $70.3 million in air pollutant removal and $26.8 million in reduction of stormwater annually. In New Jersey, the current planting potential is an additional 452 million trees in our urban areas, which will cost $4.5 billion. But this will exponentially increase our annual ecological benefits and savings in the state. Through the RGGI funding, we can increase our carbon sequestration to meet the 80-50 rule and enhance our urban and community forest resources. Next slide. Urban trees and forests further the goals of the RGGI initiatives, but not only by sequestering carbon, but providing significant additional environmental, economic, and social co-benefits to communities. Trees not only help New Jersey meet the 80-50 goal, but help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, help address other environmental issues in cities. For example, trees help reduce stormwater runoff, clean our water, and reduce flooding. They're basically like giant straws sucking up the extra water in our cities. And they also help clean our air. Having an increase of trees in cities can further efforts to address health risks associated with airborne illnesses. The trees help filter our air pollutants such as fine particle materials and sulfur dioxide. Currently, our urban forests remove 7.94 million kilograms of ozone annually from our cities and 14.22 million kilograms of air pollutants overall. This equates to about $70.33 million per year in services from our urban trees, just in air pollutants alone. Another way to look at this equates to removing 3.9 million vehicles off New Jersey roads through the power of urban forests. Trees also address the inequity in tree canopy for overburdened communities and give people more access to green spaces and the benefits they provide. Tree canopy is the layer of leaves, branches, and stems over the ground and you view above. For example, lack of urban tree canopy can make it hotter in our cities. Trees help by shading building surfaces, deflecting the sun's radiation, and releasing moisture into the atmosphere. It can be almost 10 degrees cooler in the shade of a tree than unshaded roadways and walkways in cities. Economically, urban trees can increase property value 5 to 20% on homes that have street-lined trees. Studies show consumers spend more money in downtown areas that are shaded, and having an increase in trees means increased need for workers to maintain these trees and plant them, resulting in an increase in green jobs. Currently, the New Jersey's urban forest directly creates 20,579 jobs within the state, and our urban forests provide a staggering $1.9 billion to New Jersey's economy annually. Next slide, please. So the New Jersey Urban Community Forestry Program is another program that would assist RGGI in meeting these goals towards the 80-50. Our program helps by facilitating municipalities at a local level to create management plans to manage and maintain your urban forests for longevity of these ecological services. This program also offers resiliency planning grants, which enables you to take an inventory of your trees and assess the health canopy of each of your urban forests and make plans in the future to maintain them. We also offer reforestation and tree planting grants to grow our urban forests to increase our carbon sequestration and other ecological benefits. Thank you for listening about the green carbon aspects of New Jersey's terrestrial carbon sink. Up next is Mattia Yipson, who will talk about the blue carbon side of these projects.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Initiative 2, which is promoting blue carbon in coastal habitats. And then I'll also talk about some of the other ways that New Jersey DEP is spending RGGI funding to invest in carbon sequestration. So Initiative 2 of the original strategic funding plan, it seeks to promote, protect, and maintain the beneficial role of New Jersey's tidal marshes in the carbon cycle. Blue carbon ecosystems, such as salt marshes and seagrass beds, are particularly important in the fight against climate change. Blue carbon is the carbon stored in soils and plants in marine ecosystems. Although salt marshes cover only a small percentage of the United States, it's been estimated that they account for 21% of the carbon sequestered by ecosystems. For Initiative 2, New Jersey DEP is the sponsoring agency, and they are dedicating part of the 10% of the fund that's allocated to forests and tidal marshes to the protection and restoration of tidal wetlands. In terms of priority rankings, the agencies have ranked 2 objectives as critical for this initiative. The first is a net reduction in greenhouse gas emission or a net sequestration of carbon, and the second is the provision of co-benefits. Next slide, please. So again, blue carbon is stored in the soils and in the plants of marine systems. As one of the most productive ecosystems on the planet, tidal wetlands pull carbon dioxide out of the air as part of photosynthesis, and they store it in their roots and leaves, and then deposit that into the soil when they die. Unlike terrestrial systems, these ecosystems do not become saturated with carbon. So while forests kind of reach a natural saturation in terms of carbon, tidal wetlands gain an elevation, they accrete, and with each additional layer of sediment, they can sequester more carbon. In addition, the stored carbon can be sequestered for a millennia. This is because wet soils slow down the decomposition of dead plant matter, and they keep it from being re-emitted into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Next slide, please. So tidal wetlands are one of the defining features of our coast. They form this lush green band, all around New Jersey. In addition to being beautiful, tidal wetlands provide a myriad of ecosystem services. This includes flood protection. They provide habitat for recreationally and commercially important fish and bird species. They're hotspots for ecotourism, and they clean the water. And now they're also being appreciated for the role they play in carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. So some recent work that was done by Duke University found that New Jersey's coastal marshes and seagrasses currently store about 60 million metric tons of CO2e. And each year, in addition to that, they sequester an additional 215,000 metric tons of CO2e. However, when marshes drown or erode, portions of their stored carbon are re-emitted to the atmosphere as greenhouse gases. Therefore, the projected coastal habitat changes due to sea level rise have significant implications for future blue carbon storage and emissions. Over the next 100 years, New Jersey's coastal habitats are projected to sequester up to 95% less carbon than they would if they were not affected by sea level rise and erosion. For the highest sea level rise scenario, the lost carbon sequestration potential is approximately equal to the greenhouse gas emissions from 5.1 million cars driven for 1 year. This is likely an understatement. This is a pretty conservative estimate of the potential losses. And so you can see the value of the carbon that is sequestered by these habitats and also the potential risks if we don't do anything to protect them. So because these are so important, DEP has several initiatives going on to help protect and restore these habitats. Next slide, please. One of these efforts is the Coastal Ecological Restoration and Adaptation Plan. We call this CRAP. New Jersey DEP is developing this plan with Rutgers and some other partners, and it seeks to identify tidal wetlands and submerged aquatic vegetation areas that we want to restore or protect. And those areas are first selected by community interest and concern. So we went out and met with the public to see which areas they have the most interest in. And then we made some maps about the functions and services that are provided by those habitats and that could be improved if we were to restore these sites or protect them. And one of the layers or focuses of this mapping was a carbon sequestration layer. And so it should be able to help us figure out where we can get the most carbon sequestration benefit from our restoration and protection of salt marshes across the state. Next slide, please. Another effort is the natural and working land strategy. So DEP is working collaboratively with the New Jersey Department of Agriculture to draft an evolving natural and working land strategy. The strategy will identify and implement actions that will mitigate the impacts of climate change through carbon storage and sequestration. And tidal wetlands and submerged aquatic vegetation are some of the habitats that are targeted in the strategy. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk about how DEP is spending the 10% of the auction proceeds that were dedicated to funding carbon sequestration projects in the state. These funds have been put towards DEP's brand new and very exciting Natural Climate Solutions Grant Program, which will fund on-the-ground implementation of projects that create, restore, and enhance New Jersey's natural carbon sinks, such as salt marshes, seagrass beds, forests, urban parks and woodlands, and street trees. The funding for the selected projects can range from $250,000 to $5 million, and the projects are expected to last 3 to 5 years in length. Next slide, please. So there are 2 different project categories within the grant solicitation. There's blue carbon projects and green carbon projects. So again, blue carbon projects is a catch-all term that we're using to describe tidal wetland and submerged aquatic vegetation focused projects. There are 4 different project types that are eligible for funding. The first are living shoreline projects. These help to prevent erosion and prevent the re-emission of stored carbon that's in the soils. The second is restoring tidal flows in wetlands. The third is increasing the cover of salt marsh vegetation. And the fourth is submerged aquatic vegetation restoration. Next slide, please. In terms of the green carbon projects, this refers to forests and tree canopy increases. So here we have two different types of projects. The first are forest and woodland restoration projects, and the second type are urban forestry canopy and water quality enhancement projects. Next slide, please. So just to walk you through the timeline, the grant was launched and applications could be submitted starting on May 16th. The applications are due on August 15th. By November 14th, the funding recommendations and notifications will be made to grantees. And then within 30 days, we expect to be able to release the funding. One thing to note about the application process is that we are quantifying the expected carbon sequestration benefits of all of the projects that are being submitted, and that will be used in the ranking of the projects. Okay, next slide, please. So as a reminder, please apply for these grants. We're really excited about it. You can apply by August 15th, and there's a link here. So thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over to Jonathan Ratner from EBA. Thank you.
I'm going to speak for a few minutes about plans for the state's green bank. Next slide. I want to start with a good high-level general definition. It's the way the Coalition for Green Capital, which is the country's leading nonprofit in the green bank space, puts it. A green bank uses public capital to mobilize more private investment into underserved green and resilient financing markets to fill market gaps. Green banks have the ultimate goal of enabling private capital partners to enter clean energy markets at scale without green bank assistance. So, in other words, a kind of a planned obsolescence is built into green bank strategies. The idea is that when a program is successful, it's going to get shut down because the private capital markets have taken over the role completely and don't need support from a public mission, green bank. And the entire approach, I think, is best described as really motivated and the rationale is that there's a general understanding that public capital and the availability of public capital doesn't come close to having the kind of scale required in order to implement the necessary energy transition, and that the private sector and private capital has to play the leading role if this is going to successfully happen. Currently, there's more than 24 state and local green banks either operating or, like us, in final pre-launch stage. They're a mix of government institutions and ones run by nonprofits, but in all cases have a very clear public mission-based focus. The first funding plan, RGGI funding plan, allocated an amount equal to 12 to 15% of the RGGI auction revenues for the capitalization of a new statewide green bank. We have not launched the bank yet, but made substantial progress. For starters, just for a little bit of level setting, the green bank will launch as essentially a brand under the EDA umbrella. Although it's possible that over time, the structure and governance arrangements for the green bank could change. And actually, publicly, we refer to this initiative as the New Jersey Green Fund, since as a technical matter, green banks are not banks because they're not deposit-taking institutions. So what we are getting ready to launch is the New Jersey Green Fund. You'll see on the slide here a little bit of a timeline of the work that's been completed. We started early in the pandemic with an RFI out to the marketplace to generally solicit public input. Then we really spent the better part of last year working with a team of 2 outside consultants. One of them was the Coalition for Green Capital, which I just mentioned, that played a leading role in incubating and helping to launch many of the green banks around the country, as well as the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, which is New York City's green bank. We worked together with them to develop a mission, an approach, and a set of launch phase products for the fund. The work involved lot of benchmarking against the experiences of other states, identification of best practices, analysis of how the Green Fund could most optimally fit with the New Jersey policy landscape. Above all, though, it was a process of identifying and analyzing market gaps that a New Jersey Green Fund could productively fill. And key to this process was this very comprehensive process of stakeholder engagement, discussions with private lenders, contractors, developers active in this space, EJ community representatives, and environmental organizations with a more general focus. Next slide. So on the right side, you see the three products that we are have identified through the process so far to be part of the initial launch of the Green Fund. An energy efficiency bridge financing product for energy efficiency contractors who, especially the small and medium-sized ones, tend to struggle to expand their capacity and ability to kind of service more projects. A business development loan that will be focused on minority and women-owned businesses. These will be concessional in nature, and they will be coupled with a strong training and professional development component. And finally, a product that will essentially wrap around our very successful NJZIP cash grant program with a credit enhancement, essentially helping the lending side of things that needs to go along, to cover often the piece of the cost of these vehicles that isn't covered by the cash grant. The work we've done kind of clearly identified that the reason why this particular marketplace has had trouble developing this financing of electric trucks is concerns that lenders have around the residual value of these trucks. How quickly over time is the value of these trucks going to decline? At their end of life, is the battery pack in the truck a big liability because you got to pay to dispose of it, or is it an asset with great value? Along with these products, there are actually two non-RGGI funded initiatives that are also being ready for launch. The Garden State CPACE program will launch this fall. We were authorized by statute to design and administer that program. We're actually not providing financing under it, but we are the administrator of the program, and that will be launching this fall. Another area also that's going to be developed in coming months will be receive benefit from federal funding from the so-called Federal State Small Business Credit Initiative, funding that's come to New Jersey. A significant amount of it will be allocated to the Green Fund. And this will be a very, very broad ranging kind of program, very agnostic among types of clean energy technologies and the kinds of projects that get invested in. The key thing, though, is they must support small businesses, and they certainly must result in job creation. Across all these programs, we're taking very seriously the need that disproportionate benefit of these programs go to historically overburdened communities. EJ communities have suffered disproportionately from pollution and the results of climate change to date. We've got a lot of work left to do. Candidly, wish we were further along at this point. Loan programs do raise design implementation issues that are not necessarily present for grant programs. And this is actually the only RGGI funded program that is oriented towards lending rather than grants. However, there's a real extra upside that goes along with the fact that these are all to be lending programs. Two things. The fact that they are loan programs makes it easier for these programs to leverage and crowd in more capital, more private capital. And secondly, because they're loan programs, the money will come back and we'll be able to recycle it and deploy it again and again, over time. So, we feel strongly that there's plenty of absorptive capacity for the programs that we are getting ready to launch. And once we do launch, that the money should get out into the marketplace and start having real practical benefits quickly. And I'm going to turn it over now to Matt Rivas at DEP.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you everyone for tuning into tonight's webinar. It's really been great to hear about the combined expertise from our speakers on the previous RGGI investments. And we all know that there's a lot of other experts here in the audience tonight as well too. So now's the point when we want to hear from you. Next slide, please. The next draft RGGI strategic funding plan will be enhanced with the comments and suggestions we hear today and over the course of the next 30 days. If you think that something tonight, tomorrow, or the next few weeks, please let us know. We have taken the advice of our partners in the Office of Innovation and the DEP Office of Environmental Justice to really embolden this engagement process. So here you'll find an outline of how this will work. Voting today on the All Our Ideas platform has opened, and with the feedback, the agencies will draft the next strategic funding plan over the summer. From here, we'll release the draft plan and return to you all for comments in the fall. Those final comments will then be taken into consideration for publication for the final plan in the winter. And from here, we'll continue to deploy programs and projects to fight climate change in your community. Next slide. Thank you. So how can you get involved? We'll collect input on a web-based engagement page called nj.gov/RGGI/engage. Our engage page has a comment box, email address, the All Our Ideas tool, and a listserv for you to stay in the know. Through the listserv and social media, we'll be periodically providing updates as the plan moves through the development process. If you think or you want to promote the engagement, our website will also feature a community toolkit that's in both Spanish and in English, social media posts, flyers, email templates for you to share with your community. At this time, I would like everyone to visit the link in the chat. Next slide, please. Or take out their phone to scan the QR code. This will bring you to the All Our Ideas tool, and this tool is best viewed in horizontal, as Helene mentioned before. Just gonna put the link in chat for you all. And here on the website, we're gonna go through a live demonstration of the tool. It's really easy to use and allows users to evaluate a series of climate solutions. So if everyone can just take out your phone and scan the QR code. This tool is also available in Spanish as well. All right, Doug. Through the All Our Ideas community, members can select between two randomly generated climate solutions from a list that the DEP, the BPU, and the EDA staff have developed. Users select the solution that they believe is more important, or they can write an idea of their own. This will be then added into a list of potential priorities to vote in the tool. The results of the voting will be collected in real time and into the list. The priorities will then inform the next draft strategic funding plan. As I mentioned before, this tool is available in both English and Spanish. And if you have a fun time using this, or if you have any other questions come up along the way, please let us know, because it's really been a pleasure to share this engagement with you all. And now we will turn this back to Helene to moderate your question and answers.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. All right, so we've had a lot of questions coming in. We also had the ability to take in questions when people registered for the webinar. So I was going to go over a few of those first, just to make sure that everyone had an opportunity. So the first question I'm going to ask to Bob Kettig: how does the decision-making authority flow through RGGI? Who makes decisions at what steps in the process?
Thanks, Lane. It's important to remember that RGGI is a cooperative effort among the participating states. So each individual state has common policy goals and initiatives. So it's through their individual regulations and authority that they participate in it. So it's essentially the states that come together. The board of directors is comprised of the individual agency heads from like the Board of Public Utilities and the DEP of each individual state. But it's not like a voting body. It's a key thing. It's not a compact among states. It's a group of states that reach consensus where there's a common goal and use the larger market to benefit from the efficiencies. It would be a lot harder for each individual state to regulate the electric generator units and have an individual cap and trade program. For the example that I gave before, by having a large economy that's, again, it would be the third largest economy in the world if it was if it was an individual country. The states benefit from the efficiencies in that. So the short answer is the states do this under their own authority, and the individual states have their department agency heads act as a board where the conversations go, where there is consensus among the states, where there could be a common initiative that's adopted by all.
Great, thanks, Bob. Going to switch gears. We had a lot of questions around electric vehicles come in. The first one will be, will New Jersey provide incentives for people who wish to buy electric cars and DC charging stations? Will the state bring back the 5K credit towards electric vehicles? I think Kelly from BPU, you were going to answer that one.
Yeah, hi, Eileen. Thanks so much. And thanks for the question. Consistent with the Electric Vehicle Act, which requires at least 30 million in funding for 10 years, BPU has proposed in the FY23 budget, which is out for public comment right now, to continue to fund the EV program, which includes incentives. The proposed incentive level for the program is $2,000 for vehicles with an MSRP of $45,000 to $55,000 and $4,000 for vehicles with an MSRP of $45,000 and under, based upon vehicle e-mile. So that's what the program is currently proposed as. We are accepting comments on that. There is a public stakeholder meeting on our Charge Up program on Monday, which you're welcome to join and provide comments on. And we're required to have a budget advanced by the end of June.
Great, thanks, Kelly. This is actually potentially a follow-up to that one. What is New Jersey doing to help residential buildings like condominiums, multi-dwelling with parking behind the building to provide chargers and charging options for their residents?
Yeah, thanks. That's another great question. We were really happy to launch a program this year, a municipal, multi-unit dwelling program, which offers incentives for chargers and infrastructure to support level 2 chargers and others at multi-unit dwelling. In addition to that, there's a statewide municipal ordinance to ensure charging would be a permitted use in all areas of the state. And I'll just note that the MUD program had several rounds of funding. It was very popular, and it is also currently proposed for additional funding in the upcoming fiscal year budget.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask this next question to Melissa. What towns have received grants and where have the funds been spent?
Thanks, Helene. I just want to add to the question before about MUDs. DEP also has our It Pays to Plug In program, where we offer funding for level 2 chargers, and we periodically have solicitations for fast chargers, which also could be used at MUDs. Going to the current question about where did we fund projects, I'm going to drop 2 links in the chat. Both are for DEP. One is the RGGI dashboard, where you can see more details on the projects. And the second one is a link to the projects that we funded for VW and RGGI, broken out by solicitation, as well as links to the proposals that came in for those projects. I can also put my email address if anybody has further questions. Feel free to reach out to me, but that's probably the easiest way, just to drop the links right in the chat.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears here. We had a question come in around the carbon sequestration. Is any RGGI funding going towards the protection, purchase, and creation of simple, natural, green open spaces in an equitable manner? There is great inequity throughout the state when it comes to fair distribution and use of green state. Mattia, would you mind responding to that one?
Sure, yes. Yeah, thank you for the question. I can't comment on the first part of it, but as far as the second part, we recognize that often funding does not go to environmental justice communities. And as a part of that, and because of that, in the Natural Climate Solutions grant, it's one of the priority ranking factors is whether or not environmental justice communities are expected to benefit from the project. And that could be because of the project is located in the community, or it could be because of the proximity of the project.
Yeah, and the Natural Climate Solutions grant rate that's 15 million going towards that. So this is kind of more a general, broader question. What are the large scale plans and efforts to stop energy waste, no matter how energy is generated for electrification? So much is wasted in all sectors. Some studies suggest as much as 60% of energy is wasted. What is being done through RGGI to address energy waste? Bob, would you mind answering that one?
Sure, Helene, I'll take a shot at it. Well, I think that first and foremost should be that energy efficiency has been a priority of the state, particularly at the Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program. There's been a long-standing initiatives on energy efficiency, and RGGI just adds to that. It's a keep in mind, think of energy efficiency in the sense that it's on us individually. Think of energy efficiency as of making your home envelope more energy efficient, but also there's ways that Clean Energy Program and the RGGI program can achieve energy efficiency throughout the electric grid. You're right that there is the less economic, higher emitting units tend to be the most inefficient. So, what we want to do is, as we move forward and transition to a clean energy future, is where the increased deployment of renewable energy, load management, where certainly energy storage, whether that's hydrogen or batteries, will help serve, where we don't have to rely on the most inefficient units to provide energy during those really peak demand days. And we want to lower our demand during those high peak days, or meet that demand in a combination of while we lower it with more efficient sources. So your point is taken, and it's valid that historically that the electric generating system has had inefficiencies. It will continue to have inefficiencies, but as we move forward, the idea is to take those most inefficient, high emitting units, will matriculate out of the grid through time, and as we optimize energy efficiency, we'll just continue to get more electricity, more heat per a unit of energy spent. And also kind of one other thing that we don't think about as a form of energy efficiency is, electric vehicles get a lot more miles traveled out of a unit of energy as opposed to an internal combustion engine. So as we transition to electric vehicles, there's also energy efficiency, which you don't really think of in terms maybe as traditional energy efficiency, but we're going to realize that. So point well taken. Inefficiencies is something that has been a challenge in environmental protection and reducing emissions, particularly CO2. And RGGI is just one of the suite of solutions that is going to get us towards a more efficient future.
Thanks, Bob. This next question's for EDA. It's not clear if the new strategic funding plan is reserving any money for clean energy electricity projects. Jonathan, could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. None of the initial 3 products, I would say, are focused on clean energy electricity generation, per se, but the other 2 programs that I mentioned that are not going to be RGGI funded, CPACE and the federally funded initiative, are going to certainly have a lot of priority given to supporting projects in the renewable energy and energy storage, space. And just to kind of add on, though, to something that Bob, just said, although I wouldn't say that the focus of any of our initial 3 products for the RGGI funded products are clean energy electricity generation. I mean, it continues to be true and will be for a long time that, the lowest cost source way to, transition to a carbon-free economy or a low-carbon economy is, by avoiding, fossil fuel use. Therefore, energy efficiency remains the low-hanging fruit. And, we've seen that the BPU has done, a tremendous job of putting in place the incentives necessary to, help the state meet the energy efficiency targets that were set back in 2018 under the Clean Energy Act. But we see capacity issues and a need to support the state's energy efficiency contractors. And that's why, 2 of our 3 programs are focused on supporting and building the capacity of the state's energy efficiency contractors. Still, by and large, going to be less expensive means of greenhouse gas reduction than substituting renewable energy for a fossil fuel, supported source of energy.
As a follow-up, Jonathan, we had another question asked if there was going to be an open call for proposals for the Green Bank where entities could propose projects.
Yes, I mean, again, that's not going to be the RGGI funded project, but the program, but the SSBCI, the federally funded, is what will be launched as what's usually referred to as an open window or market responsive kind of approach. If anyone is familiar with the way the New York Green Bank has operated, virtually all of the financing they do is in response to incoming proposals under notices of funding opportunities or RFPs, and that is the way that particular initiative will be organized.
Great, thank you. We had some general kind of engagement questions. How could we involve students in this initiative? A teacher had reached out and asked. I don't know, Matt, if you want to take that one.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely welcome the voice of the next generation of climate leaders. I would suggest going to the All of Our Ideas tool and voting in class. I would definitely use also the community toolkit and promote it to a library or wherever else you go.
We also had a question about what individual citizens can do to support New Jersey's climate change plans. I don't know, Bob, if you want to respond to that one.
Sure, I'll take a crack at giving people advice on how to help out. Well, the pathway to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals that was outlined in the Energy Master Plan and the 80x50 report really had 2 major ways to accomplish it, right? It was the reduction in emissions from transportation and reduction in the emissions from the building sector. So the buildings that we work and we live in. So it really gets back to where the low-hanging fruit is. It's the energy efficiency. I think that individual citizens, I understand there's a cost to making those choices. But certainly if you're going to upgrade appliances, if you're looking to replace a heating system, if you're looking to purchase a new home, that there's a lot of ways that you can achieve just reductions, just beyond simple energy efficiency. Air source heat pumps are gaining popularity and the cost is coming down. Certainly, electing to maybe your next vehicle purchase could be an electric vehicle. There's tremendous opportunity there. But also it's not just maybe you're not in the market for an electric vehicle or a new vehicle, and it's there's obviously a cost associated with that. An individual citizen may not be prepared to lay out right now, but just small things in changing our behavior. Really, when we say electric vehicles, we're really striving for is a reduction in vehicle miles traveled from fossil transportation. So just by making different choices and reducing your vehicle miles traveled, carpooling, public transportation, just being just more efficient. It's like energy efficiency for transportation. It's a very cost-effective way that individuals can reduce their emissions and benefit from a cost savings in that. So I would refer those really interested in looking and getting into weeds and what we can do as individuals is take a look at the 80x50 report, what's online, and as Matt was saying that we're interested in fielding questions. So if anything specifics comes up, feel free to reach out to us. But I stress energy efficiency first, and I think that's a win-win.
We have a few more questions around EV charging. Does the level 2 charging grant only cover a portion of the installation costs? Are they impractical for multi-unit situations? I don't know if Melissa or Kelly, if you could speak to any of that.
I can talk about the BPU program. The grants that are available under our MUD program pay for $1,500 towards the purchase of a dual port networked level 2 EV charging station, and 50% of the cost, up to $5,000, for the make-ready costs for level 2 EV chargers. That's for the current program that actually just closed on June 3rd. We have a new program that's proposed for the new fiscal year. We also have additional awards for overburdened municipalities. On top of that, $2,000 towards the purchase of a level 2 EV charging station for a MUD located in an overburdened municipality, and 75% of the cost, up to $7,500, for the make ready for level 2 chargers in overburdened municipalities. I don't know if DEP wanted to add anything to that.
The DEP's it pays to plug-in program for a level 2 charging stations. It's $4,000 per port is the reimbursement, and we require 2 ports for the location. We cover the charging station and the networking, but not the installation of that charging station.
Great, thank you. Well, folks, looks like we're right at 7:30. I think there's maybe one final slide. So again, key points to remember, please join our RGGI listserv if you want to stay updated on this. You can always send us questions or comments via our NJRGGI email account. We have our comment period is open until July 11th. Please, please, please get the word out on our All Our Ideas tool. We really would love as many people, many New Jersey citizens, residents, students, to be voting, to be giving us their great ideas. This recording will be posted on our RGGI Engage page, and we'll be sending it out shortly after this webinar is done. And just stay tuned. And thank you everyone for attending. We do appreciate your time tonight.